Hola y bienvenidos a un juego aleatorio de miércoles. Esta vez voy a jugar 40 Days and 40 Nights of Rain. Es una novela visual cortita. Sé que la he jugado antes, disculpen todos los clics porque estoy revisando que todo está en orden. Esa. Siento que ya la he jugado antes, pero nunca en el canal, pero siento que la he jugado yo antes por mi cuenta. Entonces, empecemos. The tin-plate soldier has a dream. The dream of rain and war never ends. "40 days and 40 nights of rain." Ow. Oh. Ok, no se puede hacer nada al respecto. Ya lo bajé un poco, ya. Ya. El olor a pólvora pasó por el viento, fastidiando mi rostro. Gotas de lluvia congeladas corrían en sus mejillas. El distante sonido de las bombas violentas subía, traslapándose con el sonido seco de una bayoneta. La calle estaba teñida en gris. Cualquier cosa y lo que sea estaba teñido, reflejándose en sus ojos. Había un ruido. Tranquilo, lo voy a leer en inglés, YOLO. Ya les dije, soy súper mala traduciendo estas cosas y de paso ustedes también practican su inglés. Win-win. The explosion of a fighter plane resonated as it flew, skimming low over the ground. The shadow of a corpse in the trench was hidden. The shapeless form of an enemy peered out. The man's instinct, his eyes and nose, informed him that was an enemy approaching. There was a thunderous explosion. Just then, the ally on his right side jumped as his head exploded. There was a force like a downpour as metal bullets simultaneously hit their targets. Fragments of skull and brain matter splattered on the man's cheek with a wet sound. He wiped it off expressionlessly, like a machine, facing forward and firing at the enemy in front of him. He changed out the magazine of his rifle and pulled the trigger, shooting until the barrel became hot. He performed no more than those actions, still like a machine, over and over. A crack in the rubble moved as the shadow of an enemy soldier faced him. That moment, he felt it. The other soldier was still young. His body was smaller, perhaps a juvenile warrior. They simultaneously gulped a breath and pulled their triggers. Ok, este no lo he jugado. Me estoy confundiendo con otro que se ha jugado que era parecido. Pero no, este no lo he jugado. Así que estoy emocionada. The grey field of vision scattered into deep crimson. The young soldier was shot in the head, and he convulsed and collapsed to the ground. Bits of his skull and brains splattered from his head, and already the prototype was finished off. Several minutes passed, and the number of corpses increased. Emotionlessly, he confirmed the situation, and then again breathed a heavy sigh. He continued to pull the trigger. Strong rain began to fall. O sí lo he jugado, ya no sé, no estoy segura. A flapping sound woke him as a pigeon flew above. He lazily shifted his gaze as it hung in the air. Several grey feathers, all the same color, fell from the sky. They loosely trailed and at length landed on the stone plaza. At the same time, a freezing raindrop dripped onto his cheek. Shaking his just awoken head, the man sighed deeply. As usual, the town plaza was deserted. On a nearby bench, an old woman fed a pigeon. This same old avenue, a gloomy look spread over his face as he sank into silence. The old woman had a heavily wrinkled face. The pigeons cooed as they scrambled for the scraps of bread. Again, he shook his head lightly and closed his eyes, thinking about the dream he'd just had. He had a dream that reeked of rain and gunpowder smoke. Ahora el volumen está muy bajito porque los efectos sonidos estaban muy altos. Yeah. After a while, he closed his unchanging eyes. At length, the man rose, beginning to walk somewhere. He unfurled his expectantly bothersome umbrella against the weak rain. It fell without any sign of stopping. A truce had been settled on 10 days ago. Since then, soldiers had relished the peace. The man, who had no relatives, walked along the rustic highway, heading towards an inn. During the previous war, he'd lost one finger on his left hand from an enemy's plane's machine gun fire. Ow. However, since the battle had begun again, he returned to the front line despite others' thoughts that it was reckless. The small town seemed to be silently sleeping. Now they'd evacuated all the residents, and soldiers were living in this imitation environment. The town was quiet, like a ruin, and time flowed through this quiet calm. The rain fell on the everyday war, continuing without change. The man went on, continuing the walk on the stone pavement of the road. The inn will keep out the rain. Under the roof, his fellow soldiers gulped down alcohol, causing a ruckus during the day. His anxiety grew at not knowing whether the never-ending war situation had grown worse. He shouldn't feel uneasy, but they drowned themselves in liquor. They cheerfully raised their bottles, revealing scars from vicious burns. The man watched from nearby, touching the hollow place where his thumb had been. They returned to the liquor again and again, causing an uproar in this lifeless somewhere. He didn't join their group, instead completely ignoring them. As time passed, he was teased for not drinking, and he clucked his tongue in irritation. But the innkeeper would sometimes say something about the people she'd seen. They were all annoying, and thus many of them left town. The rain thundered onto the quiet street. He tried to think of a way to pass the time besides endlessly walking. If he slept, he'd dream of the battlefield. He wanted to avoid that by all means. There had been effects from the long spell of rain, including the ruins of the uninhabited town. Nevertheless, unexpectedly, the sound of his footsteps and the sound of someone else's footsteps seemed to overlap. He unintentionally stopped walking, trying to verify whether or not he had misheard. He heard the tiny, tiny sound of footsteps. Realizing it was the sound of someone else, the man slowly lowered his gaze. A little girl walked along the surface of the damp road. Her long white hair seemed to glow. Whoever she was, her desperate face was turned upward as she walked. The rain poured from the clouds beyond, and it seemed that was what she was looking at. She was looking at the sky. The moment he thought that, she fell down. Unintentionally, the man stood in mute amazement. The girl crouched on the stone pavement as if enduring a sharp pain. On the other hand, as if young for a fleeting moment, he got a feeling of a strong will as he looked at her back. At length, the girl stood up again as thought she'd been shot. Again, the same way, she began to walk away. She began to walk while looking at the sky, and suddenly fell again. Her small body struck the stone pavement. Slowly, her white hair gently fluttered down. He observed the scene, pondering whether his leg would inconvenience him. This town had many returning frontline soldiers, and it was not unusual for their limbs to be a hindrance. But the battlefield had nothing to do with this girl. Again, the person began to walk and immediately tumbled to the ground. Spontaneously, he reached out his hand halfway. The water bounced weakly off of the stone pavement, and the sound echoed. Noticing his footsteps, the little girl unexpectedly raised her head. Blue eyes, agreeable eyes. He unintentionally gulped a breath. Her clear eyes were the same color as a cloudless sky. But that didn't surprise him. Who are you? She spoke. Her voice quavered, a voice shaking with tears. Many tears fell from the little girl's eyes as she asked, "Are you all right?"
What?
You fell down.
Yes, I'm alright, I'm sorry.
As she spoke, the confused girl stood up. Her small hand gripped the wet cloth of his sleeve, lowering her head as she faced the man. Judging from appearances, she didn't seem to be hurt. Perhaps she'd bruised herself. If you were crying, I doubt you're really alright.
No, it's okay. It's...
The girl's voice was now remarkably tiny. She rubbed the traces of her tears, trying somehow to smile. She failed again and again, and then forced herself to laugh, albeit sadly.
That's not it.
The little girl smiled tearfully, and the man looked down at her expressionlessly. Changing the subject, he asked again. Where do you live, kid?
What?
Where do you live? You'll catch a cold if you stay wet like that. Suddenly, she looked down. Chewing her lips, she seemed to steadily ponder something as she narrowed her eyes. Tears gathered in her sky blue eyes. They spilled over, slowly slipping down her cheeks.
I'm so sorry,
she murmured as they dripped down. Sha, sha. The relentless sound of the rain continued. With that, the girl closed her mouth. Perhaps she was an orphan of war, thought the man. Nevertheless, the little girl seemed detached from this sad, diverse world. He didn't know her circumstances, but it seems unnecessary to get her to tell him. On that note, the girl looked down at her feet and turned around, and the man began to walk away. After he walked for a moment, he suddenly stopped and glanced over his shoulder. Behind him, the girl was standing stock still. The girl who waited and the man who'd left. Neither walked, and both simply stopped. Her blue eyes seemed to be looking at something far away, and he gazed at her. He sighed and turned back. He spoke to the girl as she stood still. Is your stomach empty?
My stomach?
If you're hungry, come with me. With those words, he began to walk. Behind him, in the space he'd just left, he heard hasty footsteps, and then her small shoes splashing in the puddles as she ran. She walked beside him, vigorously falling. Welcome! Silence fell as they opened the front door of the inn. The landlady, who was busily going about her work, as were the lively customers, all fell silent as if struck by water. Their glances sharpened on his companion, the little girl. The next instant, there was a sudden uproar. Hey, who's the kid? She's completely soaked, ain't she? Why'd you bring that girl here, Tinplate? What were you thinking? Raising an eyebrow at the noise, the man crossed the room. Silence fell as he sat at the counter, and just then, the landlady brought a towel, rubbing the girl's head. She unconcernedly looked up as she was briskly scrubbed. After she finished carefully wiping, people again shook their heads in displeasure. That's no good. She should lend her clothes to change into. Well, you, kid, where you're from? I don't know. He probably brought her 'cause she was soaking wet. Or so you say. Aren't you gonna answer us? She's not a little dog. Where you from, miss? Well, he's Tinplate, but I didn't catch your name. Completely drunk, the red-faced man tilted the bottle, laughing heartily. Again, The girl looked around a little, shaking her head as she asked,
Template?
Yeah, that's this guy's nickname. He never laughs, he never cries, and he never gets mad. It's like he's got no heart, that sort of thing. You didn't know that, miss? The story of this heartless tin plate soldier? The little girl quietly turned around. She fixed her eyes on the man behind her who'd brought her here, quietly murmuring,
Heart.
Yeah, he doesn't. What you said, kid? Come on, sit down, sit down. Confusedly, the girl tried to climb up onto the tall chair, but appeared to have trouble. The surrounding soldiers called approvingly, Cute, cute. The little girl's face flushed a deep red as a dish of hot stew was placed in front of her. She noticed that before the man was placed an identical bowl. With somewhat mechanical movements, the man began to eat his stew. The little girl watched this and started to copy him. Separately, it didn't cool in her mouth as she grimaced as the heat hit her face. She tried again, this time slowly and carefully cooling it before eating. She unintentionally murmured this, delightfully smiling at the innkeeper. Then, she looked at the man, who in contrast smiled bitterly as if amazed. The girl quietly finished eating. Inside the shop, shouts of acclamation were received. The young, charming little girl was an unusual sight in this town of many soldiers and aged people. In the shop, the landlady chose some child-sized clothing, narrowing her eyes at the girl's figure. You're certainly not a very cute child, are you? Do you even know anyone around here? The man didn't answer the teasing voice. He wasn't concerned about something like this. She whispered quietly to him. I'm relieved, though. Even you can be human sometimes, huh? No waiting for his reply, she kept walking towards the little girl. She sat at the head of the counter, and the man turned towards the stairs. The room they'd be lodging in was on the second floor of the inn. As he turned to look over his shoulder, the man raised his eyes as they met with the little girl's. Without saying anything, the man left the dining hall. The rain continued to fall from the dark gray sky. The man leaned against the window, picking up his gun in one hand. He was accustomed to its weight. It was like a familiar part of his arm. The gun stock hit his right cheek. The butt fit snugly in the hollow in his right shoulder. His index finger nudged the trigger, his remaining finger tightly grasping the stock. He let out a deep breath. That moment, a shriek rang out behind him. Phew. He lowered the gun when he realized it was a familiar voice. The little girl stumbled through the door, sitting in front of it. She was wearing new clothes, and the man with the gun stared in blank amazement. Taken aback at her returned appearance, the gun shook in his hands as he spoke in confusion. Miss? But this room...
I'm sorry.
No, I wasn't surprised or anything. Apologizing, he returned the gun to its original position. Still, though, the girl continued to sit. Saying nothing, she stared, the man reflected in her sky-blue eyes. Finally, she spoke in a hesitant voice, her expression changing to one full of determination.
Please, I have a request.
What?
I hope I'm not bothering you. I'll sleep on the floor. Think nothing of it. It's okay. So could you lend me the corner of this room?
The man raised an eyebrow at the sudden favor. He stared at her eyes serious, almost desperate. For what reason? The man quietly asked her, and yet, the answer in his heart had already been decided. Because she had no home, because she had been separated from her parents, he didn't mind anything. From the start, there was anything in this room. The number of homeless little girls would grow, and he wouldn't care. But she gave an unexpected answer.
I want to see it.
See what? That moment, the girl's eyes were very clear. As if praying hard, she answered.
This world. I want to see this world.
She spoke, the little girl.
This town is good to start with.
So spoke the little girl.
But I can't go everywhere by myself.
She muttered this in a small voice.
I want to at least see this town.
She spoke with a laugh. Completely, anything and everything was surely impossible. Is there something wrong with your eyes? The man asked, tilting his head a little.
Huh?
Your reason for wanting to see everything in this world. Can't you think of anything else? She heard him speak and smiled as if troubled, and didn't say anything. They were considerably tired, and the little girl immediately tumbled into bed and fell asleep. Her body curled up like a kitten's, breathing peacefully as she slept deeply. With a sigh, the man picked up the girl in his arms. She didn't wake as he moved her to the couch. He gently laid her down and covered her with a blanket. He gazed at her childlike sleeping face and then looked out the window. Beyond the other side of the glass, the rain continued to fall. The sky would shine dimly in the morning, though now it was black, as if painted. He heard the sound of rain as he sat down on the bed by the window. He leaned against the wall and closed his eyes. He didn't worry about the hardness of the plastic and lumber as he fell asleep. That hand, tightly and naturally, held the gun. He climbed a hill that was bursting with greenery, passing one house. It was the beginning of the spring season. The meadow, wet with morning dew, spread out before him, and a gentle breeze blew by. The man said nothing, continuing down the road as he walked towards the house. The sun was warm, and the wind carried the scent of flowers. He wore a dirty covered military uniform, which was out of place in a location like this. It had been a long time since he'd trodden on the ground of his hometown. Regarding the army, for the first time, he'd been permitted to return to his hometown. He felt that he was dreaming as he viewed the landscape, spreading out now before his eyes. But there was no joy in his heart. His heart was frozen, unmoving fragments. Because he knew this was the same old dream. He stretched out his hand to the doorknob. He knew there were people inside. After hesitating for a few seconds, he closed his eyes. Unconscious, he expected to wake up, but his expectation was betrayed as usual. And so, he again opened the door. In this place was a white sea of blood. In the shadows of the shape of the fallen chairs, his young son lay there. The upper half of his body was stained with blood. Literally blown off, his head from the nose up was gone. Bits of his skull and brains were spread all over the stone bed. The walls and ceiling were splashed with blood, dried and sticky. By the window in the sun, his collapsed wife lay face down. Her bullet wounds were hidden, covered by her blood-stained clothing. But under her skin, the pressure from the gas had destroyed her internal organs. Yellow flowers had fallen, surrounding the corpses. They'd probably been there to decorate the window. The flowers had dried up, withering in the shadows. The blood and meat had already begun to rot and decay a long time ago. Perhaps their stomachs had been upset. The smell was stagnant. But, paralyzed, he couldn't smell a thing. ¡Qué triste! With time, the destruction of the war expanded, and it was heard that villages had been plundered. All able-bodied men were all taken by the military, but the village in their memories remained peaceful. The deteriorating state of war and the peaceful town were undisturbed, and in general, the villagers were uninterested in the war. And so, this place with the green hill and the small house lost the war, even in their imaginations. One day, he returned to his house, expecting a battle. One day, he returned to the home of his beloved people, expecting a battle. And thus, he lost that place forever. Over and over, he continued to gaze at that dream. Already, the tin-plate soldier's heart had stopped moving. If there were no tears, there was no sorrow either. but the indifferent scene from the past was burning in his eyes. And then, he slowly closed the door. ¡Qué triste! What? The quiet sound of the rain woke him. Inside, the light was gone, dim and gloomy as usual. The ocean sky slicing through the square window pane. The sun was relentless, the rain soaking every house. He sighed deeply, pondering their dream. The blood-stained memory was carved into his mind. The way his family had died seemed cruel. You could probably call it atonement. But he alone had survived, and that dream repeated endlessly. He unconsciously stared at his palm. In the dream, he turned the doorknob with his hand, the same hand that had continuously taken lives on the battlefield. Again, he sighed deeply and looked up. The coming morning was marked by the whitest sky, and he stared with emotionless eyes. That time, he heard a wretched voice coming from the bed. What? Eh? He turned his face towards the voice, coming from the girl who was just getting out of bed, grasping the situation as she started to fall. Wrapped completely in a blanket, she was stuck tightly and fell out of bed. After a number of seconds, entwined in the blanket, she began to twist around unsteadily, peeking out.
I'm sorry, was I sleeping on the bed? It couldn't be that you left this place last night?
The little girl spoke confusedly. The blanket again became tangled around that body. With a sigh of concession, he pulled the blanket off of her. He pulled her to the bed, unwrapping the tangled blanket, and brushed her back along her. I'm oddly selfish. I don't care about essential things.
Well, you're...
I'm used to it, so I don't care. You will have got a cold, that's a problem. His answer caused a distressed look to spread over the girl's face. There was no excuse for using his bed. However, she hadn't got a cold. She had that kind of expression. Looking down, the little girl turned around. Thereupon, he abruptly heard a loud voice from behind.
Thank you very much!
As he turned around in surprise, the girl bowed, face flushed deep red. Confused, he vaguely nodded in answer. Thereupon, she grasped the hem of her skirts tightly and asked, What?
Could you tell me your name?
Gradually, he realized that until now, they hadn't exchanged names. It's you. A simple answer. The little girl, as if confirming something important, repeated it.
You-san.
You-san, she murmured, as if singing. As if to not forget it twice, she repeated it over and over. Facing towards the little girl, this time he asked, And you are? She opened her sky blue eyes. That instant, she looked terribly surprised. And then nervously gave her name.
I'm Kirie.
And then she laughed like a blooming flower. Why had he missed the chance to find out her name? He knew why. On the battlefield, names were unnecessary. Everyone just called him Tinplate. It wasn't bad to know one's name. There was simply no interest. Around him, people would just die soon anyway. And then he knew he'd die sooner or later too. Calling people by their names was unnecessary. Referring to people by their names was unnecessary. Until now, and always. What's wrong, Kirie?
I'm sorry. Please wait, you-san.
It seemed that she'd taken a while to fold the blanket. She descended the poorly built stairs and sat down at the counter. Seeing the prepared breakfast, he unintentionally raised an eyebrow. Next to you sat Kirie's breakfast. It was an omelette, though he could have cared less. But Yu's breakfast was the same, although he usually drank coffee with it. Model yourself after this child. Are you, an adult, just going to finish half of your breakfast in front of her? A child? Here, here, eat up.
I don't have anything to thank.
It's fine. Children shouldn't worry about something like this.
But
It's alright, so hurry and sit down. Losing the will to argue, you reached out to his breakfast plate. As he carried the food to his mouth in silence, the impish landlady smiled. Admit it, you lose. Kiri appeared unable to use her fork very well. With a delighted face, the landlady began to show her how to use it. Sometimes she wiped her mouth with the hem of her apron. Beside her, Yu silently continued eating. Outside the inn, it continued to rain quietly, even now. Today as well, the town was dyed a rainy color. The endless rain painted every house an ashen gray. The landlady picked out an umbrella for Kitty so that she could go outside. However, she declined the offer. As she asked why, the smile disappeared from her face. The sky was hidden. Two people walked side by side through the town. As usual, Kitty fell often. There was no reason for her sudden tumbles. Each time, he'd help her up and she'd smile distressedly.
I'm sorry, I'm fine.
As he thought, her eyes were sad. He slowly showed her around town. It was a tiny old town, and the scenery wasn't much to look at. Here and there, the roofing of several houses had peeled off, and some of the bricks in the walls were missing. An ally, still as death, residents whispered solemnly to each other of news of the war. Anxiety and uneasiness, hearts that understood truth, and now a faint hope. Kitty gazed at them seriously one by one. It was as if she had decided to leave nothing unnoticed. Completely, it was as if this place was the entire world. Today again, the plaza was deserted and silent as death. Just as they walked in, a flock of pigeons took off into the sky all at once. Gray feathers fell to the pavement like snow, fluttering down like a snowstorm.
Wah!
Kiri gave a shout of joy. At the corner bench was an old woman scattering food. She clapped and winked, and Kiri looked at Yu as if distressed. Yu looked on in silence, and Kiri timidly approached the old woman.
Hello? Nice to meet you.
Kiri reservedly greeted her. Hearing that, the old woman said nothing, like a rock. Unintentionally, Kiri's face twisted as though she were about to cry. As she shook her neck from side to side, pigeons cooed carefully.
I'm sorry for being so abrupt. There are a lot of pigeons.
With a solemn face, the old woman continued to be silent. The pigeons cooed as they pleased, an echoing sound. These animals were full of a mild life.
Because they're cute.
Apologizing for her intrusion, Kiri hung her head. That moment, the old woman held out her hand. Letting her take her rough, bony hand, she handed her a bag of scraps of bread. Kiri jumped in surprise, stiffening in place. But at length, she nervously accepted the bag.
What? This?
The moment she tried to ask, the pigeons took off all at once.
Yeah!
A barely restrained shriek rang out. On her arms, her shoulders, one by one, the pigeons landed on Kiri's body. Kiri giggled as their feathers tickled her. Aww. And then she reached into the bag and began to scatter breadcrumbs. Even now, several more pigeons landed on her shoulders and arms. She turned around happily, dancing like a dolphin. Standing still in silence, she gazed at the scene. Abruptly, a voice was heard from behind her. That child, is she yours? No, she's not. Well, who is she then? Her cracked, wrinkled lips were dry as she began to spin words. They were like a rusted machine, seeming to come alive and move to some kind of tempo. Perhaps reading through to how he felt, she glared at him. You come to this plaza every day. You were born in a good year, young man. Not answering, are you? Really, such an ambitious man. Our son is a bit splendid, even if he is at that age. Kyrie turned around, pigeon still clinging to her. The falling rain dribbled down, rolling down her snow-colored hair. Eyes narrowing a little, the old woman continued to speak. But you're living this story. It's a war. You understand it. You're a soldier. You're not saying any words of consolation? Such an uncouth man. Her harsh words bore a kind tone. Her eyes, buried in wrinkles, seemed to be looking at something far away. Perhaps it was the form of someone lying there. You look like you saw someone die. Well, since an old lady is talking to you like this, it's not surprising. As for dying... It was 6 months ago, halfway to the aerial bombing. His plane was shot down. Well, what should I do now? What are you so bitter about? The war? About this old lady being left alone and abandoned? I thought I was already dead. It's a mystery, though. Within the incessant rain, Kyrie turned the bag upside down, scattering the leftover bread scraps. Watching that form, the old woman suddenly parted her lips. People unexpectedly let that guard down so easily, don't they? Finishing her scattering of the food, Kyrie ran up to the original two people. Signalizing with a silent nod, you turned to leave. Facing his retreating form, the old woman muttered something as if talking to herself. Why has the world come to this? It's no one's fault though, is it? You said nothing. The uninterrupted rain soaked the two people's bodies. Pointing a soaked finger at the sky, she stood on tiptoes as the many drops fell.
Look, the sky is grieving. It's as if God is crying.
That time, thanking the old woman, Kyrie began to run, falling forcefully. An infinite number of pigeons took off into the sky. Like a miracle, their gray feathers shedding down. Esto es muy profundo, me está dando pena. Me está poniendo muy triste. Yo, welcome back, miss. It's raining outside today too. It's pretty wet, huh? Hey, lady, you gonna dry her off? I get it. Shut up. Hey, get out of the way. Just after noon, the two people returned to the inn to eat lunch. The moment they opened the door to the shop, they were greeted with busy voices. Grimacing with an unpleasant face, Drew spontaneously closed the door. Just before him, the same as yesterday, the landlady seized Kyrie with a towel. As she struggled like a puppy, the screaming girl's head was scrambled vigorously. She suddenly grabbed the towel, and turning her eyes, Kyrie was left. Just after that, about to return to the room on the second floor, Drew was captured. I'm in lunch for you. Are you just gonna waste it? Grabbing his neck, she dragged him back. Resigned, Drew caught by the nape of his neck, was taken to the noisy table. As always, a group of sullen men was gathered around the table, drinking and smoking with ill humor. Kyrie sat down in the middle, flushing deep red. Miss, where you from? Did you just fly here or something?
That's today.
Hey, mistress, bring something hot to drink. This girl's freezing.
In the park.
Yeah, well, why?
The old woman.
Hey, here you go. Team plate. You want jam with your bread? No. Well, have some marmalade then. Yeah, why were you with that old lady?
The pigeons.
Did someone carry them? Oh, I'm gonna go. Wait up, miss. Miss? There's something in your hair. Mind if I get it out? Huh? A breadcrumb?
It's bread.
First of all, calm down, miss, alright? Expressionless, you watched the uproar. In the clamor and confusion, someone stroked Kyrie's head with a rough hand. Her white hair was flattened by the hand. Calm down, soothingly. Kyrie picked up her toast and sat down next to you. Chewing in silence beside you, she held out a glass of water. Unconsciously, he took it, and froze after a few seconds had passed. He took a long, hard look at the cup she's handed him. It had appeared up till now that the other customers had been facing away. but that instant they immediately began to resume their meals in surprise. As usual, the men surrounding them were loud. In the middle of all of it, Kiria's face was flush red as she nibbled at her toast. If you eat, it's best to do it quietly. Well, I don't really know what flavor it is either. With a sigh of effort, the landlady sat down next to you. Poking his cheek, she whispered in his ear. This town is happy again. Thanks to you, that child is able to eat. That little girl's stomach was empty, and that's the extent of this inn's bad reputation.
But this town is not safe.
True, but only worry about that. Saying that, the landlady looked in Kiri's direction. Finally, Kiri looked down, almost as if she might cry. The men saw this, and they all apologized at once. Kiri's head was clumsily but kindly stroked. You knew. When they brushed Kiri's hair, a heavy-hearted expression filled her across her face. As if looking at something beloved and dazzling, her eyes narrowed. Her hand trembled a little. Everyone remembered something through her. Possibly, detached from the war, they remembered back to peaceful times. We're closing, so why don't you leave? That's the best, but hey, what the hell? Siding with what seemed like a bitter smile, she surveyed the store interior. The sooty ceiling was dimly lit with a naked light bulb. It was by no means elegant. Without speaking, she looked around with a smile. This is my dead husband's store. Almost childish, isn't it? As she spoke, smiling, the still silent Jew resumed eating. Lunches were finished, Kiri was blushing deep red, the men continued to clamor, you ate in silence, and the landlady watched over everything without a word. He returned to the lonely room and closed the door. He could still hear clamoring voices from downstairs. Uncaring, he sat on the bed and, laying down, closed his eyes. Darkness spread across the backs of his eyelids, and he concentrated. His blood vessels showed through his skin, faintly dyed red. The town was bombed and burned to the ground. He dragged his body forward as the tanks rumbled. The color of his blood was on the trigger. The memories flooded back into his mind. Outside the window, the rain relentlessly fell and continued to fall even now. It was as if God was crying. He thought he heard someone's voice. Before he could think about who the owner of the voice was, Jude dropped into sleep. Unaccustomed to the uproar, he was quite tired. He usually didn't sleep, but this time he had a dream. But the endlessly cycling dream did not change. In silence, he pulled at the door and opened it. At his feet was a wide sea of dried black blood. Chunks of meat and brain matter were scattered all over, the unceasing prototype of a head. In the sunlight from the window lay the unstable corpse of his wife. In the bloodstained room, yellow petals were scattered. He continued to watch the gruesome scene. His face did not change at all. After a while, he mechanically shut the door. And then stood there, exhausted, until he awoke from the dream, always.
What?
He woke up to the sound of the door opening. Quickly rolling off the bed, he stood up. Unconsciously, his hand sought his gun. At the same time, remembering the miserable scream, he blinked. Before his eyes, Kiria tumbled through the door. In her hands, for some reason, she held a blanket. Behind her, two men peered in. The men picked up the fallen Kiria, brushing the dust from her clothes. What are you doing, miss? I was told to carry those.
I'm sorry. Thank you very much.
Be careful, miss. By the way, Team Plate, are you still half asleep? As he woke, the carefree scenes unfolded. Heaving a sigh of not understanding, he slowly stretched. Apologizing, Kiri hugged the blankets close. With a doubtful face, Kiri answered as if disconcerted.
The landlady...
Use the room next to this one. Words spilled out of one of the men. They suddenly moved to the next room. She again had a doubtful look on her face, but somehow Kitty answered happily.
It's a two-person room, isn't it?
The new room was quite spacious. This time there were 2 beds, and Kitty set down the blankets she'd been carrying. Though it was a bit stuffy, it was clean inside the room. At once, Kitty leapt on the bed and peered out the window. Bit by bit, the street lamps began to light the street, and it was blotted out by the gentle rain. The same as lunchtime, there was an uproar after dinner. He felt it and sighed. Suddenly, Kitty stood up and handed the blanket and bag to you. Inside was a small jar of jam and a bit of bread.
You, son, you look tired, and I know you hate how noisy it is out there in the cafeteria. So I brought this because I thought you might want it. Plus, the landlady told me to.
I see.
The landlady will be happy. The old Yusan wouldn't have eaten this. I heard there might be jam in it too, but I didn't get an answer.
Kitty smiled softly. If that was so, he looked back on the previous everyday life. He certainly didn't remember speaking with anyone here before. Not tired in the least, Kitty looked out the window. Her sky blue eyes watched the rain dampen the streets. As ever, they looked sad.
How much longer is it going to rain?
He murmured in almost lonely voice. Ay era el sobre. He didn't expect an answer, but still he was crushed by the empty silence. However, Kitty turned around as though repelled. From her blue eyes, a clear drop of water dripped down. Tears? The instant he realized it, Kitty again faced the window. The relentless sound of the rain stained the silence of the room. Her small shoulders shaking, Kitty looked out the window for a while. After a bit, she murmured,
40 days, 40 nights.
Huh? Kitty slowly turned around. Her white hair moved smoothly, and tears continued to fall from her eyes.
For 40 days and 40 nights, the rain will continue to fall.
He didn't understand the significance of her words. Furrowing her brows, she gently smiled, but at the same time, tears spilled down her cheeks. As if she couldn't bear it, her voice shook as she spoke.
I'm sorry.
She bowed her unchanging face, murmuring over and over that she was sorry, so sorry. She wept for a long time without stopping, and he sat near her as if cuddling. He reached out to gently touch her small head. Like a child, the warmth of her body was transferred. He stroked her smooth hair with one hand as if to comb it. Seeming surprised, Kitty raised her head, and for some reason, even more tears fell. Tears slipped from her tired blue eyes, almost like rain, dampening her cheeks. The memory was still hazy, his distant past. The endlessly weeping child, in this way somehow consoled. The current you will never have smiled at that time. Expressionless, touching it as if it could easily be broken, he continued to stroke Kitty's head.
I'm sorry. I can't. I really... Everyone is so kind. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
Kyria kept crying. Beside her, you sat close. He stayed nearby the whole time, feeling as though something unbelievable was happening. ¿Ella es la lluvia? When Kyria finally fell asleep, Yu laid a blanket on her and stood. Collapsing on the other bed, he stared up at the ceiling and spread both hands. A faint warmth was left on his fingertips, Unconsciously, he kept opening and shutting his hands. I see. A single tear fell along with a quiet murmur. The humans who live are so warm. In some empty place, only the voice was left. But like a moving rusted machine, it was a strange sound. After a little while, you looked at the palms of his hands, and then slowly fell asleep. This is the tale of the late night of a certain day. Outside the window, gray clouds indicated rain. After having the same dream as always, you woke Kiria. Shaking her shoulder, he called to her to wake her up. Eyelids fluttering, Kiria peered out through her blue eyes. It seems somehow difficult, sorry. Lowering her head in apology, she spoke. For some reason, he thought it was strange. Long ago, he used to wake up screaming in the middle of the night. But now, he just slept as if dead. Pressing her lips together tightly, Kiria stood next to the bed, exhausted. He faced her and asked if she wanted to leave that place. Aren't you going to sleep?
No, but, well, you're...
Don't worry about me. I always dream the same thing.
Dream.
The bewildered Kiria murmured. He remembered a strange feeling from the sound of her voice. Thereupon, he realized she had a troubled expression on her face.
I don't have dreams.
He couldn't think of an answer. If she didn't dream, surely she must sleep deeply every night. Other than that, he couldn't think of any reason she didn't dream. It's getting late, we should probably sleep. He urged her, but she didn't move. You watched her worriedly as she tightly gripped the hem of his blanket. After he stared at her for a while, you sighed and rolled back the blanket. If that's the case, you should get in bed. After making a surprised face, she quietly crawled under it. Her small body settled snugly under the blanket. Until you had found her, she'd been lost for a long time and her body had been cold. Her long hair smelled of the cold air and rain. Her body curled up like a kitten, hunched at the end of the bed. She saw and endured the drowsiness until she couldn't keep her eyes open any longer. In the distant past, in this way, she and the child had slept together. Her curled up body was lulled to sleep. Instinctively, he gazed at her face and heard Kiria mutter as she was half asleep.
Just now, you somehow seem in pain.
Somehow you seem sad. This is the tale of the afternoon of a certain day. As always, the sullen old woman sat on the plaza bench, but Kitty approached her, reaching out one arm as if naturally. In her hand, she held a sack, which was smaller than the one the old woman had. It was the one with pigeons embroidered on the neck, Kitty's favorite. That day, Kitty seemed remarkably happy as she scattered the bread. The pigeons hopped, and the old woman's eyes softened as she stared at the girl.
Well, is she your child after all?
No, that's not true.
Then your grandchild? I'm joking. You're not taking this seriously enough.
He couldn't think of an answer to her sudden words. Thereupon, the old woman glared at you, making a bored huffing sound from her nose.
You've got an honest face, too. You've still got a way to go.
Kitty was beautiful as she jumped. As she spun round and round, her white hair fluttered as she twirled. She was bathing raindrops as she skipped around the small feet. This is the tale of the evening of a certain day. As they opened the door to the inn, they were met with a cheer. For some reason, one guest had an armful of stuffed toys. The men were so drunk they were red-faced, as if they did it every day. Clamoring as they stood, they handed her a small stuffed bear. Although they say they weren't lacking in daily necessities, it wasn't right to treat them like toys in a shop. Wondering where it came from, he was suddenly thrown into an uproar. "What's with that cool face, Team Plate? You came here too." "That guy went to Martha around the corner to get that. His daughters got 2 of them. They sit on display in the window." Forcibly grabbing him by both shoulders, you whispered into the guest's ear. Kitty accepted the stuffed toy, looking as if she couldn't believe what was said. Looking embarrassed, the red-faced man scratched his nose. Growing more and more flushed, he nervously asked, "Miss, how is it? Is it bad? Or are you happy?"
Yes, thank you so much. This.
Kira's face suddenly twisted into a tearful expression. Immediately after, she laughed like a flower, tears running from her eyes. Seeing her crying, the guests at the inn simultaneously became confused. In the middle, Kitty tumbled the tears away and smiled.
I'm very, very happy. I'm sorry, this.
Tears continued to spill. Trying to stop them, the customers gathered around Kitty. As he was pulled roughly by both shoulders, Ju's head was bent into a strange direction. Watching the scene, the landlady laughed. Narrowing her eyes, she watched Ju and Kitty as she prepared dinner. When there was a pause in the clamor, she smacked the pot to make the guests help set the table for dinner. When the meal was ready, Ju grimaced with a painful expression. This is a tale of the late night of a certain day. Looking out the glass window, Kitty wept. He saw her trembling back as she looked down. Ju, lying on the bed, heard her small voice raise the air. It was late at night, and they couldn't sleep. She was crying as she looked at the threatening sky. Ju rose and quietly approached Kitty.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
He heard her voice as she continued to apologize. He gently touched her head and her back shivered in surprise. He stroked her head to calm her down. He got a fleeting sensation that it was warm and small.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Her murmuring grew noticeably. He stroked her hair. She continued to weep. As if she'd committed a sin, tears kept spilling. The incessant sound of rain was gentle in his ears. Her voice was still apologizing, almost as if praying. And so Ju, without saying a word, continued to stroke her hair. "Don't cry," he murmured in a small voice. Rain fell from the dark gray sky, getting stronger by the day. The rain continued day after day, the town growing cold as if it were the middle of winter. He gently warped a blanket around Kitty's shoulders. He completely covered her shaking shoulders as she stared out through the glass window. The girl and her eyes matched. As if muttering, Ju continued to speak. Emotionless, but speaking nonetheless. "You don't have to cry." With those words, tears again flowed from Kitty's eyes. This is the tale of every day. Day after day passed quietly. Time passed very, very quietly. And so, everyone forgot. Nothing changed, nothing ended. Forgotten. ¿Qué? ¿Se olvidaron de que ella existió? One morning, he awoke to find the town wrapped in an eerie silence. Ju got an ominous feeling as he jumped awake. In the bed beside him, he did breath in sleep. Okay, yeah. He rushed to the glass window and pushed it open. Along with the rain, a damp breeze brushed against his cheek. He smelled the stink of gunpowder smoke. Oh no! A chill ran down his spine. In the scenery, unchanged from yesterday, a tense atmosphere hung over the town. Suddenly, he heard the sporadic sound of gunfire, and immediately his thoughts flew to his rifle. He heard a continuous echo of gunshots, and the hazy sky shivered. He wondered why this was happening, but couldn't think of anything. He immediately closed the window and took his gun from the wall. His reaction time had become sluggish. Several minutes ago he'd been peacefully sleeping, but now he was irritated. At one time, he'd been able to sense the air on the battlefield by instinct, and now he'd lost it. Impatient weighed in his chest, and he prepared himself in a matter of seconds. Breaking into a run, he looked over his shoulder at the inside of the room. In the bed by the window, Kiria slept, curled into a ball. He was going to inform her he was leaving, but he stopped in confusion. She will escape to a safer location. That was probably the landlady's job. He looked at her peaceful, sleeping face in silence, and then turned on his heel and ran out of the room. No, 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 no! No la dejes, no! Wait, what? Guys. Mi juego crasheó. Mi juego crasheó. Ya, regresé al lugar donde el juego se, entre comillas, cortó. Y ahora se colgó de nuevo, pero de peor manera. Y ahora sí. Creo que ya debería... A ver, esto ya lo leí, ya lo leí, ya lo leí. Ahora voy a... Ay, quería grabar acá. Esta parte me da pena. Algo me dice que ella es como que un arma o una especie de como que androide que dice como que ya aquí hay vida, vengan a destruirla, algo que tiene que ver con la guerra, no sé. Me inventó como que 1000 saves. Acá fue donde se cortó la última vez. ¡Se volvió a cortar! Funcionó. ¡Woo! Okay. As he ran down the stairs, everything was empty and still as death. Too late, the bodies of soldiers were nowhere to be found. Here and there, broken bottles of alcohol had fallen to the floor. Reflected in his eyes was the landlady, sitting at the counter as always. He didn't see them run for shelter or tremble in confusion. The landlady lifted her head, glancing at you, and then muttered with a sigh. This is bad, but I have no intention of escaping. But... It's finally started. At her desperate words, he gulped a breath of air as she looked at him quietly. Just then, there was a deafening roar from the sky. The building nearby was bombed, and the walls and ceiling vibrated as if fake. A cloud of dust puffed up, and something like a metallic buzzing sound assaulted his ears. Cracks ran across the smashed window pane like a spider web. Beyond the front door, screams of terror and rage thundered. The sound of gunfire overlapped with the shouts. At the same time, the cloud of dust vanished, and several soldiers dashed into the inn. They supported their wounded comrade from both sides. His leg was injured. In order to protect him, one of the soldiers shot at the arena behind them. His target's body exploded, and intestines and blood sprayed as he fell to the pavement. The soldier hiding in the safe doorway closed the front door and cursed. Shit! Immediately, he began to barricade the room with the desk and chair. He unlatched the window and checked the condition outside. The wounded man screamed like an animal. His leg, gone from the thigh down, exposed the bone and muscle as blood gushed from it. Lashing out into a spasm, he began to violently flail his arms. You, in order to stop the bleeding, held the convulsing man's body to make him stop. Tears and saliva dripped down from his ashen face as the man mumbled something. Leaning in closer, teeth chattering, he listened as his voice leaked out. "No, I don't want to die. No, not in a place like this. I don't want to die. I want to go home. I don't want to die." The color drained from his trembling lips. Hot blood gushed out onto the floor. The opposite of his body temperature, the man's body was cold. Ay, se murió. "Leave that guy alone, Tinplate. It's useless." At that moment, he heard a scream, and the roaring sound of another explosion split the air. The walls and ceiling vibrated, and broken fragments and dust obscured his vision. Immediately after, fire erupted from enemy soldiers' guns outside as they drew near. A tremendous gun smashed the wall, and the sound of the light bulbs shattering brought him to his senses. He couldn't express ugh and ah at the muddy screams pierced his ears. What appeared to be a shrapnel was scattered within the fragments of the collapsed wall. Broken glass was bloody in the guard's face as he crawled towards the window. Choosing when to fire, he counterattacked, but it was only a matter of time before they gained control. "Shit, it all ends here," someone shouted, and he considered the significance of the words. The man who'd lost a leg opened his eyes and tears spilled over as he died. With an emotionless look, you silently closed the dead man's eyes. Distracted by fear, a young soldier wept in a corner of the room. Despair and uneasiness, a heart that understood truth, various feelings penetrated the thick silence. Dying. You thought about it as if it were someone else's problem, always continuing to meaninglessly fight, finally finishing. He'd said it will end here, but he didn't think it was bad either. The tin-plate soldier came to the appropriate conclusion. That time, he heard a crying voice. "Y voy a grabar, por si esto decide morir."
Why is this?
Kira stood at the top of the stairs. Her dazed, sky-blue eyes were wide open as she stared at the scene downstairs. She couldn't believe what was happening here. "Miss?" he heard her dazed voice mutter. Everyone there looked at Kirie as if they were looking at something beloved. And then, the soldiers, separating from you, exchanged glances and nodded. A thick voice rose. A few days earlier, Kirie had accepted the stuffed toy from this red-faced man. "What the hell are you doing, Tinplate? There's no time! Take the girl and run!" His soot-smeared face grinned with an unusual determination. And then, the man set his jaw and pointed to the back door. Inside the store, everyone's eyes were fixated on you and Kirie. You stared at Kirie as she stood on the stairs, and then faced the red-faced man and responded. "I understand, but what about you?" "You idiot! You're the one taking her! It's our duty to stay here till the end! Don't worry about us, Tinplate!" After a few seconds of hesitant silence, Ju began to run. Shouldering his gun and climbing the stairs, he grabbed Kirie by the arm. There wasn't much time left. Hurrying along, he heard voices urging him on. As he pushed open the back door, the form of the landlady of the counter caught his eye. With an always unchanging smile, she watched you and Kirie. Together. She opened her mouth to urge them to go, but her expression changed and she took her head. Her husband had died in this shop. It was a childish problem.
Aww. That's...
Kirie murmured in a daze. Soon, looking at her crying face, the landlady quietly spoke. "Don't cry. That child." And then you turned to her, and she narrowed her eyes in a smile. "You can make that kind of face too." You pulled the back door open in silence. Violent rain poured from the dull gray sky. Holding Kirie, he rushed out, his back to the place that had everything. Kirie raised her voice in a shout as her face paled.
No, please, let me go back. Yusan, Yusan!
Holding her as she struggled, he continued to run. The ashen rain misted across his field of vision. The thunderous roar of bombs echoed through the dull weather. His breath was hot. Kiria continued to weep in his grip. Yu's muscles were freezing as raindrops dripped from down his cheeks. They almost looked like tears. ¡No! ¡No de nuevo, no! ¡No!
Okay.
They almost looked like tears. This is the end. Yeah, this is the end. With these anonymous words, the remaining people stared at the back door. They faced the barricade once more and all readied their guns. Ammunition shot through the sky with a deafening roar. The bullets zipped by, grazing their cheeks, and chips of wood flew, knocking holes in the wall. A form lay by the window. The red-faced man reached up to his chest. As he opened his pocket watch, his mouth softened. Inside was a picture of his daughter, who was the same age as Kiria. Freckles were scattered across her laughing face. He covered his face as he wept. His voice was barely audible as he prayed. And then, there was no reason for the several soldiers to keep holding out. They continued to fire. Ah, I want to die. As his eyes slowly closed, the man murmured from the bottom of his heart. At the same time, a hand grenade flew through the open window, thrown casually as if it were a joke. The small lamp fell to the floor with a heavy thud. Oh no. And then it exploded. Y yo voy a grabar por si esto se muere. Ah, shit, esto es triste. No tenía ganas de leer algo triste, pero aquí estoy.
I'm begging you, please let me go, Yusan. It can't.
Holding the struggling Kiria tightly, he dashed into a dim alley. He stepped in a puddle, and an infinite numbers of drops splashed into the air. The wet sole of his shoes slipped easily. His rough breathing was harsh on his ears. After a while, the paved road vibrated from an explosion. The back alley shook violently from the attack, and they could hear the building crumble. That instant, Kiria stopped struggling in his arms. They knew the meaning of the explosion behind them, but Yu continued to walk without stopping. Kiria began to weep in his arms.
I'm sorry.
Yu chewed his lips as he ran. How many more times will he have to remember their faces? The face of the always laughing landlady. The faces of the soldiers who didn't want to die. The insides of his eyes hurt. He lost power in his arms as he held Kiria's small body. He couldn't save this child. Even if he died, he couldn't revive this little girl. Yu ran as hard as he could, aiming for the outskirts of town. He turned his back to the sound of gunfire and ran. In the distance, a hand of fire rose. The bombed building blazed, dyeing the sky a deep crimson. The burning came from the direction of the plaza. The figure of the old woman feeding the pigeons who were not to be defeated by the rain came to mind. That instant, he ran the other direction and stopped. The curtain of bright red hot smoke hit them, and like the sound of insane gunfire, it kept ringing. He ran to escape from the gradually approaching sea of fire. He now had someone to protect. It was possible to protect someone, and he knew it was this girl. The other people, cast away, could only run. He'd grown accustomed to it. Not just abandoned his life, but squashed it like a bug. He didn't know he could protect even just this girl's life. He was powerless. Like this, it was hard to forgive. His breath was hot, his lungs were burning. Kiria continued to weep, her sobs ripping Yu's heart into pieces. I'm sorry, he heard the girl as she kept apologizing. That time, one by one, the people's faces, the people they had abandoned, flashed across his mind and died. He should have died instead of them. There was nowhere for him to return to, and it was unlikely he'd survive. But the landlady had watched the growing child and laughed in delight. You can make that kind of face too. Please no. No! Fuck. Ok. Hice un safety safe ahí por si se vuelve a... Caray. Yes. Suddenly, a gang of 3 soldiers appeared from the shadowed alley. They opened their eyes and bewilderedly pointed their guns at you. Enemy soldiers. Kitty opened her eyes. You sped up and then stopped. He kicked up the puddle and held Kitty to protect her. He turned his back to the 3 enemy soldiers and ran away. He rushed into the dark alley between the buildings. The crack of a firing gun rang out. Again, he heard a number of shots in succession. The sound of the bullet whizzing through the air. At the same time, it sliced his cheek in a straight line, and blood sprayed out. As if she were the one injured, Kitty let out a squeak. They ran without looking back. They were incessantly attacked with bullets, and the pavement under their feet and the wall nearby buildings shattered. That moment, he felt something red-hot run along his thigh. The skin split open and blood splattered. Ooh. Bending forward and falling down, he ground his back teeth. Blood flowed from cuts inside his mouth. Bearing the pain, he moved his legs to drag his body forward. The dimness of the cloudy sky and dim alley were a blessing. He dove into the building with the half-broken wall. Hiding in the shadow of the rubble, he tried to suppress his frantic breathing. He pressed his right hand against the wound on his thigh as fresh blood spilled from between his fingers. He prayed they would lose sight of him, but footsteps continued to approach, and bullets zipped towards the rubble where the 2 hit. Without pause, bullets flew at them like rain. Lame, aren't they? He got his breath under control and, sticking his head out from the rubble, peered at the enemies and readied his gun. Pushing the stock against his right shoulder, he took aim. That instant, Kitty looked up from beside him. Y yo voy a grabar. In the deafening roar, she was crying, screaming in a loud voice. Please stop it! It was not a scream of wanting to be saved, but something was grieving in her cry. He spontaneously cast the trigger and stopped moving his finger. Extinguished in the leaning rain, Kitty's voice didn't reach the enemy soldiers, and yet the girl cried out. In a voice as loud as possible, she cried out, Please, stop it! Don't do this anymore! At length, the firing suddenly halted. Abruptly, an ominous silence fell, and then there was a thudding sound. Something small landed near the 2 people. A hand grenade. Oh no! Yusan! Kitty screamed. You nimbly held the girl close, shielding her body, crouching down in that place. A white light danced. The lovely, lovely world burned. And then, Yu's consciousness faded. The rain fell. From the ocean sky, drops fell in a radical shape. As if attracted to something, aiming towards nothing in particular on the ground. Only the rain existed, the quiet sky. The moment he regained his senses, you thought he was dead. His right thigh was still streaming blood, as was the cut on his face. His uniform was slightly scorched. But he was alive. At length, he realized he was holding something warm. A small hand, like a mother holding her child's hand, was frantically grasping at Yu's body. ¿Es un ángel? ¡Era un ángel! There were shining white feathers, pure white feathers, the color of snow, as if praying, ephemeral wings flapping like a bird's creating a wind. Kitty and you were floating in the sky, like a fish swimming through water, like a bird soaring through the sky. They were naturally flying. You realized what he was seeing. She was a creature of the sky. That was why she had fallen so often. Pure white wings springing from Kiria's back. Kiria. He tried to call her name, but found he couldn't speak. He gazed into her sky blue eyes. Tears formed in her eyes, and she murmured softly,
You, son.
And then she suddenly fell. He felt the wind slice by his cheeks. But just before they hit the ground, they suddenly stopped falling. The pebbles at their feet jumped, and the wind drew a circle around them. Kiria flapped her wings once more and dropped to the ground with a thud. The gunshots were distant, and there was no sign of life in the ally. It suddenly became quiet, and the wind and rain became very audible. Her wings trembled as if she were in pain. Somehow, when she'd been with him, it had been harder to fly. Rain soaked the girl's wings, and before long, their luminosity faded. Then, suddenly, the girl stood up. Running after her, he grabbed her arm. He captured her hand struggling in his, and again the girl tried to run. But her small body, as when he'd encountered her before, fell. And as distant gunshot resounded through the sky, she shouted. Crying, she desperately raised her voice.
Please stop it!
She screamed as she rose. Running, falling, she rose. Again and again, she progressed forward.
I beg you, please stop this! Please don't do this anymore! Don't murder anyone anymore! Stop all of this! I beg you! Please, stop this!
The pouring rain drenched her entire body, and after a while, she stopped walking. The gunfire didn't stop. It rang out eternally in the distance.
Stop it! Please, stop!
The incessant rain soaked her from head to toe. She raised desperate eyes to the sky, and tears kept dripping down on her face. He thought, after she appeared, the rain always poured. Suddenly, he remembered what she'd said a few days earlier. How much longer is it going to rain? So you had murmured, and she had answered. He clearly understood her answer now.
For 40 days and 40 nights, the rain will continue to fall.
Y yo voy a grabar porque tiene la pinta de que se va a colgar. She said she wanted to see the world. She'd seen those who died, and she'd seen those who had perished. Her eyes were completely burned into his memory. He'd missed his chance to hear the reason. The world will end?
That's correct.
Her voice was as quiet as the rain as she answered, almost as if she were confessing a sin.
40 days and 40 nights, the rain will pour without end.
And then the world will perish. Damn. The unending war was not the reason. Little by little, the world had begun to distort into a strange shape. Public order had deteriorated. Robbery, murder, arson, crime all exploded. Gradually, the world had gone mad, and no one had the means to stop it. Like a rolling stone, human life had grown worse and worse. And so, God had abandoned this world. The earth, the sky, before becoming destroyed, would bleed out till everything was exhausted. And then, only pure people will remain in the new world.
So I was sent to select pure people and lead them to the ark.
She spoke, crying, and you continued to stare at Kiria's back, what everyone thought to be an angel.
So I already chose. This world is already falling into ruin.
At the end of the 40 days and 40 nights of rain, the world will be exhausted and the new world will begin.
And so Kiria kept apologizing to those not chosen and to those abandoned. She simply cried, continuing to apologize. Kiria had carried out her elegant duty, and now she was to return to heaven. But she had remained on the ground. The bad people who were not chosen, their fabricated world, the ruined time. She said she wanted to see it. She simply wept earnestly like the rain. Her legs, unaccustomed to walking, had fallen many times. She had walked as she looked at this world. I see. You only murmured a single word. At his reply, which didn't blame her, Kiria suddenly stood up. As he gripped her pale hand, she trembled as she asked, Why? He tried to answer. But the instant he opened his mouth, he gulped in a breath of air. They heard footsteps running in their direction. Oh no! With a scream, a shadow appeared with insane force from the ally. A young soldier, a mere boy. His face was still childlike, wet with sticky blood and skin. Like a cornered animal, his entire body quivered as he ran. His legs tangled and he fell to the pavement and he struggled to crawl forward. Immediately after, he shook his head violently and rose, like a wounded animal. Tiny bubbles foamed from his twisted mouth. He muttered deliriously, words leaking from his lips. The battle unfolded in the middle of the town. His body began to react to the terror on the battlefield, clearly wanting to escape. Killing! I don't want to die! Why? I hate this! I don't want to die! Murmuring deliriously, the young soldier continued to move his body forward. The next instant, he caught sight of Ju and Kiria. He opened his fear-haunted eyes. His slender arms trembled as he raised his gun. Weeping like a young child, he brandished the weapon he'd used to kill other people. He saw the scene and remembered. Before, he would not have faltered in shooting a young soldier to death. Shaking off the memory, he again raised his gun. The iron mass was familiar against his arm as he fleetly pointed it at the other person. Yu was faster than the other person, who was confused and obviously less experienced. But the next moment, Kitty opened her eyes. She saw Yu raising his gun, and her face took on a wounded look. That instant, he knew. If he killed this boy, she would surely cry, apologizing, embracing the corpse, and continuing to sob. And so, Yu didn't pull the trigger. Bearing with the pain, he endured the injury on his leg and ran. The young soldier shook in fear and confusion, and he screamed something in a high-pitched cry. That hand, on the verge of pulling the trigger, seized the barrel and turned it to the side.
Oh my god.
The hand tightly gripped the barrel, and a crash and a wave of heat shot out. With traces of a child still left in his eyes, he trembled, afraid of the death before him. The gun slowly slid from his hand and fell. Sighing, he leaned against the wall and sat on the ground. Those eyes stared in blank surprise at Yu's abdomen. The pain was like a dull burn. The inside of his uniform was soaked with blood, and drops splattered on the pavement. He endured the pain and watched the young soldier as he ran away. Go home, he murmured in a quiet voice. As if he couldn't believe his eyes, Yu looked up. Clenching his jaw as if he urged, he kicked up the rainwater, escaping to the inner part of the ally. Gazing at his faraway back, Yu thought. He was probably going home somewhere. He had nowhere to return to except the battlefield. The scene suddenly flashed into his mind. Once his place to return to was lost. Ah, he thought. He realized his chest was burning with pain, as if blood was gushing from his rusted heart. Something was dripping down his face,
but he knew it wasn't rain. Power drained from all throughout his body, and he collapsed to his knees in place. His field of vision grew misty as the world dissolved into the gray sky, he thought. He saw someone white in this achromatic world. Someone pure white came running. Someone very beautiful and soft, weeping as she reached her hand out to him. Before he could touch the warmth, his heart skipped a beat in sorrow. You didn't have anything to apologize for. A beautiful angel, white and pure, a gentle, sorrowful creature. I want to thank you, I remembered. She was crying. Tears dripped down her cheeks like rain. He felt hot blood on his stomach, and his eyelids slowly drooped. Right, he was, I remembered, on the other side. He was always, thank you. Always sad. He knew the truth. He knew why, so many times, he had opened the door in his dreams. He used to think it was because of atonement. He couldn't save anyone. He couldn't cure anyone. As a father, as a husband, he couldn't carry out any of his duties. He thought it was a fitting punishment. Over and over, the corpses of the ones he loved were burned into his eyes. That was why, when it was the case, he dreamed. When it was the case, he was punished for his sin. But it was all a lie. To think he could make up for the casualties, etc., was arrogant. His gentle wife, his young child, he knew he couldn't blame himself for surviving. He was the only one not allowing himself to do so. And so, he knew the duty of punishment would fall to the deceased, because what he had done was impermissible. But you continued to open the front door in his dreams. In the room, dirty with blood, the manner of their deaths would burn into his eyes as he silently closed the door. Please, no. No. Ah, yeah. Phew. It was that he wanted to go back. It was that he wanted to go back to their beginning.
Welcome home, Daddy.
His son clung to him, cheering, and he held the boy up in his arms. He'd become considerably thin, but in the time he'd been gone, the child's body had grown. He was fairly heavy. In his arm, which usually only held a gun, the living weight felt pleasant. His beloved wife stood across from him, gazing at the two people. He wasn't prepared when her face, kinder than anyone, began to overflow with tears. In the window, yellow flowers were blooming. At one time, he said they were his favorite flowers. Welcome home. He wondered if this scene hadn't been to wait for them. He opened the door hundreds and thousands of times and had given up on ever stopping. It was that he wanted to go back. He wanted to embrace them. He wanted them to embrace him. He wanted to say, I'm home. He wanted them to say, welcome home. It was a lie that his heart had already died, crying without shedding tears till they all had dried away. They were beloved. He had forgotten this. He'd been convinced his heart couldn't move anymore. He'd lived as a template soldier. He'd convinced himself he was just a tool to pull the trigger on a gun. Like that, he could forget his pain. Stupidly, arrogantly, he'd convinced himself. And yet...
Yusan.
referencia para mi yo futura. Profile pic. Profile pic que hablo, ese screenshot. For example, tears had fallen from her sky blue eyes. When she would laugh, her profile, tilted into the sad sky, was even more beautiful. It's no one's fault though, is it? For example, she scattered the breadcrumbs with her wrinkled hand. Her poisonous words always carried a gentle undertone. What the hell are you doing, Teamplate? There's no time! Take the girl and run! His comrades, always getting drunk. Certainly, they had compared Kiria to someone else. Someone they'd left behind. Someone they couldn't see anymore. Don't cry, that child. This sound, which had touched his frozen heart, was too kind. This world, which wasn't worth worrying about, was too sad. Ay, qué tristes líneas. The rain dripped down his cheeks. He intimately heard the sounds of war, loud in his ears. He couldn't hear the voice, though someone was shouting desperately. He couldn't hear that voice. Usan, you! Warm drops endlessly pouring into his wounds. They were very warm, like amniotic fluid. It would be good if rain like this continued to fall for 40 days and 40 nights. That moment, he realized. The next instant, Ju returned to his senses. In his hazy field of vision, he saw someone's form. Tears were falling into his wounds, and he realized the pain was fading. It was an angel's prayer. She had performed a miracle for his sake. It was truly an ephemeral prayer. Her shoulders were shaking. He knew that saving even one person was difficult. Little by little, his wound was closing. Her falling tears were like rain. I'm sorry. Yusan! Yusan! Si lo salva va a desaparecer. This rain was the angel crying for everyone's sake. Though she didn't have to cry, she was crying. Though she didn't have to apologize, she was apologizing. Taking on the burden of everyone's sin, she was crying for everyone's sake. Her crying face was distressed, and he gently reached out a hand. He touched her cheek. That moment, Kitty opened her eyes. You, son. The gunshots continued in the distance. The sound of an explosion burst somewhere. The rain continued to fall with no sign of stopping. In something like this, he laughed. It's okay. It's okay now. She had already cried enough. She had cried enough for everyone's sake. She didn't have to cry anymore. She was just there, and he thought everyone was happy. She had cried for everyone's sake and had taken care of everyone's worries. So, no more. Why, Yusan? Bewildered, she asked with still numb lips. The wound was already closed. Besides, you were on the other side. I was finally able to return to being a person. Again, he thought back. If one asked if something in this world was bad, it was completely bad. If one asked if someone was bad, everything was bad. No one could stop the world from facing ruin. And yet, if one asked if everyone were bad, it would be a lie. Everyone, day after day, rejoiced, grieved, lived, and loved with all their might. Even the soldiers who killed looked at someone's dream while they were in the battlefield. Still unable to move well, he strained his body with all his might and stood up. He wondered how the state of the war was. The sound of gunfire was sparse now. His legs miserably began to tremble, but he forced them to stay still. In his hazy field of vision, he desperately reached out and caught Kiri's arm. Pulling that small hand, he began to walk.
You-san?
They couldn't leave this wretched town. And then, walking side by side, when they arrived to the next town, after that,
Where are we going?
she asked with a tearful face, and he quickened his pace in response. She'd come to see this world. She still hadn't seen enough. He wanted her to see the hill where he and his family had lived together. There, it was calm and beautiful. In the spring, the flowers were in full bloom. The wet grass was lovely as it swayed in the wind. As the sun set, everything was dyed golden. The town prospered and boomed at the foot of the mountain, and it was lively, as if every day was a festival. He wanted to show her everything. As thought it were just a dream, Kiria's face twisted as he spoke. Tears spilled, and she dropped her gaze and murmured,
Why, you-san? Why are...
Lifting her face, she asked. She cried out, weeping like a child.
You-san, you're... When this rain ends...
When the 40 days and 40 nights of rain came to an end, he will die along with the world. It was inevitable. Besides, it wasn't his fault.
But...
Besides, I want to make you happy until I die. As if he'd said something very sad, Kiria looked down. It was always like this. When he said something kind, she smiled, a bitter look on her face. She smiled at that. He continued to talk as he held her hand. They went to various places together. Until the world perished, he will always walk with her. And then he remembered what he wanted. This world that couldn't be helped, this beautiful place, this pleasant place. And then, remembering over and over, wanting to laugh. Anything and everything will be ruined, but at the end, if he could make one person happy, that was all he wanted. Anything and everything was a mistake, but anything and everything was possible there. When he said nothing, Kiria cried. Tears kept sliding down those cheeks, but as she cried, he tightly gripped her hand. That moment, the two people stopped walking and looked up at the sky. Now, rain continued to fall from the ashen sky. Gunshots rang out in the distance. Very soon, from the heart of the ending world, gentle rain will fall on the two people's faces. At length, Kiria looked at you decidedly. For the first time, she wiped the tears from her eyes.
Please, come with me, you-san.
Aww. Grasping each other's hands, they began to walk. The dying youth and the angel informing of the end held hands as they continued to advance. The angel, in order to look at the world the man spoke of. The man, in order to show the world to the angel. Until death separated them. ¡Ay, qué triste! Me da pena que el juego se haya colgado tanto. Especialmente al último. Que se le fue el momentum, pero... ¡Ah, qué triste! Tengo lágrimas en mis ojos. Eso fue muy triste. El juego es algo viejo, entonces fácil. La visual novel es algo vieja, entonces fácil por eso. Ah, qué triste. No quería jugar algo triste. No creí que sería tan triste. Esta novela visual me ha dejado pensando mucho. Me ha, me ha dejado muchos pensamientos realmente. Este, real, de nuevo, volviendo a mencionar la transitoriedad de la vida. Lo que odias y amas. Realmente bien profunda. Y no puedo creer que haya estado leyendo casi por 1 hora y cuarto. Más de 1 hora y cuarto. 1 hora y 45, no sé. Bueno, ahí los dejo. Se me cuidan. Nos vemos. Y bye.